Welcome back to another Shopmade Tools video. So in this video I'm going to show you a tool that I made quite a while ago. It's a type of indexing tool for the lathe. And I started making this a number of years ago, but I hadn't finished it because I was waiting to build the new lathe stand to put the lathe on. So now that's all done, it's time to get back to finishing this tool off. So this video is on what the Shopmade tool is and also just finishing off the last bits for it. Let me get this together and I'll show you how it fits on the lathe. As you see there's a disc with a whole lot of holes in it. And this is your indexing plate. So there's X number of holes around each sort of concentric ring, I think they call it. So basically there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different numbers of holes going around in the circle here. Now I thought I'd actually marked on here the number of holes per row basically, but I haven't done it, so I'm going to have to go back to the spreadsheet and figure out how many holes are in each ring. Otherwise I'm going to have to manually count them all, and then I'll stamp it onto the face here. But I must have got tied up with some other project after I did this plate and forgot to get back to numbering it. So basically it's a 20mm shaft. The bore on my lathe is 20mm, and I've cut a 45-degree angle here, and this is threaded in the back here. So basically it's kind of a good fit, and then when you wind this in it will just tighten up because it tries to push on both sides of the bore. It doesn't have to be super tight, it just needs to be tight enough to stop it from slipping. And of course you can make different discs if you don't have the right number of holes here. And basically once it's in the bore and tightened up, you would have some sort of locating pin that goes into one of these 3mm holes here. That's about 1/8 of an inch, I think. So that's why I need to finish off. I built this part, which is fine. But I need to finish off the bit that has the pin that fits into the hole. And the reason why I didn't do that is because I was building a new table for the lathe, and I thought that the mechanism that I'm going to use for the pin to go into the hole here would have to be mounted on the table. But we'll take it over to the lathe and fit it in there, and we'll see what sort of plans we can come up with about finishing this off. Okay, so there it is mounted in the machine, and just spins round like that. This thing here can actually be unscrewed and come off if it's annoying. But you're only doing this by hand anyway, so you're only indexing around to where you need to go. So anyway, the plan was to maybe have something come off the bench here and up onto here, but then I made this table that's on the side here, so that's probably not going to work. But I do see a bracket here that I put on for the DRO, so maybe we can mount something on that bracket that can come across, and we can index it in here. So I'll have a look at what we can do with that. Okay, a little update on what we've done so far. So this is the, let's just say this is the angle piece that's already on the lathe. The block's going to go in here and be bolted through from this back side here. So there'll be some threads in the aluminium block. And then this is the plate that goes onto the front, so that'll be bolted on here. And it'll have a mechanism down here, so the wheel will be, say, where the table is underneath here, and there will be a piece that I'll make to go in here, which is spring loaded, so it has a point on it and it can go into the holes. And then I need to make it be able to slide horizontally so that I can line it up with the different set of holes on, depending on what ring it's on. So if it's a set of holes which is close to the center, I need to slide it over this side. And if it's a set of holes that's close to the outside, I need to slide the plunger down this end. So I still need to decide what we do for that, but we'll carry on and do the next step. So I've got the block mounted onto this bracket, or the bracket mounted onto the block. I probably didn't do myself many favors here. I've put the bolts here and here, and there's not a lot of room to have this mount onto the, the angle piece there. How it goes like that. So what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to drill a hole right through the middle, and that's going to bolt onto the angle piece, and then a couple of smaller holes up here with maybe some M6 threads to screw in, and that should be plenty strong enough. What I want is the block to stay on the lathe, and I just undo these two bolts here when I want to take it off and put it on. So that's the plan for that. And it's very strong, so there's heaps of strength in this. That's 5mm plate there, so it's not going to bend or flex or anything like that. So the next step is to work on the plunger, or the bit that does the indexing, so it has a point. And what I want to do here is have it spring loaded so that I can pull it out and turn the wheel around and then release it, and the spring pushes it in, and that saves it, or stops it from vibrating out of the hole, or bouncing out of the hole. So it'll be spring loaded to hold it in. So this plunger needs to be able to slide. If you're doing the holes on that inside ring, you want the plunger here, and if you're doing the holes on the outside ring, you want the plunger up here. So what I was going to do here, I was going to mill a channel, and then I'm going to, the plunger's going to have a square end that fits through this channel, or flats on it, and then it can slide sideways like this, but it won't spin around. And then I'll just have some sort of thread on, maybe on this side, where I can just lock it up in the position that I want it locked up in. So basically I'll just slide it over to whatever hole, I'll poke it into the hole, let the spring push into the hole and line everything up, and then I can nip up a nut on this side here. So that's the plan, and that's the next piece that we will make. The plunger mechanism. This part's made up of 5 parts. So down the end here we have what I call the nut. So going back to our bracket here, what I plan to do is cut a slot in here, and that nut will poke through from the other side, and it will poke through here, and so it will be able to slide across the slot. So that's how I can line it up with the different holes in the discs. So that's the nut. The body here screws into the nut, and that's what holds it all on tight in one position when you've lined it all up. And the body has a spring that goes in the middle here, and that spring is used so that when I pull the knob back, it compresses the spring, and then it pushes the pin forward so that it goes into the hole. Then there's a cap which goes on the end of the body, and that's so that I can actually assemble everything and then put the cap on. The cap has it's not drawn here, but it's like a 6mm hole in the cap, and also in the nut at the end, so that keeps that 6mm bar all straight. And then of course that 6mm bar will have a thread on the end there, and the knob will screw onto that thread, and that's sort of how that mechanism works. I'll go off and start making some of these parts, and we'll get this plunger assembly made. Okay, so I've got most of the spring-loaded plunger done. That's the nut. Um, it goes on the other side of this, and there'll be a slot in here, and that will just slide in with the slot here. The screws onto the body here, like that. And the gap in here is about 0.5 millimeter more narrow than the thickness of the steel. So we'll be able to lock it up onto there. The spring will go in the hole, like that. And of course the actual plunger or needle or whatever you call this thing, it won't be this bolt, it'll be something a little bit different. And it will actually have a step on here, a wider diameter. So the plunger will be 6 millimeters, so it'll poke out 6 millimeter hole at that end and a 6 meter hole in the cap. But in here, that is a 9 millimeter hole for the spring. And of course we'll have a recess, not a recess, a extrusion, the opposite to a recess, that pokes out just under 9 millimeters. So basically the spring will go on, and then there'll be this larger piece here holding the spring, and when we pull this back, it will compress the spring, and then the spring will try and push this forward again. So that's kind of what we want there. So that goes in there. Of course your 6 millimeter plunger goes in there as well, and then the cap goes on the end, and then we would have, you know, some sort of thread at the end here. And I was going to make maybe an aluminium knob, slightly bigger than this, so it actually covers some of this as well. I've seen that style on my lathe, so I thought it looked okay, so we might try something like that. And I've got a bit of aluminium over here of what I've casted in the past, so I might make it out of that. A little bit of turning down to do, but we're only going to be using you know, an inch or maybe an inch and a half or something of aluminium. So the next step, I think, would be to cut the recess in here so that the plunger can slide across. And I'm going to make the actual 6 millimeter plunger piece later on, because I'm not really sure how this is going to mount on to the lathe. I'll have to address that once we get there. But I think once we get the mechanism mounted in here, then we'll have a better view of you know, what clearances we have, etc. I'm not sure how much of this you can see with the camera in this position, but here's the disc, the bracket's over here, and the mechanism will basically bolt on there. So I mentioned earlier that I may need to make another bracket, and it's because I need to come out a little bit so I can actually see where the point is pointing down into these holes here. So what I'm going to do is I've got a bit of 8 millimeter steel here, and I'm going to bolt it onto the aluminium and bolt it onto this angle bracket at the back here. and then that will give me the room to move it more out this way, and then I'll be able to see, if I have it too close, I'm not going to be able to see down there properly of which hole it's going into. So I'll be able to see now, and that slot has been milled in this bracket to suit this 8mm spacing as well. So if I loosen this off, I have well over the distance for travel in both ways, and that will all work out pretty good, I think. I'll just lock that up to where I need it, and then the plunger will go into the hole. So the next job that I'm going to do, I'm just going to tidy this piece of steel up, and then I'm going to have to drill 2 holes in here, maybe just some through holes and some bolts in here, and there will be definitely a single bolt through the center here, and maybe 2 smaller ones tapped, as I mentioned before, in the top here, and that should be plenty strong enough. Alright, I've got the bracket mounted on here, so a center bolt right through, and these 2 M6s in here, so that's going to be plenty strong enough, I think. So that gives me more room, so it gives me some room to bring this out from this bracket a bit, and gives me room in here to you know, have a good view of the point that's going to be going into the hole of the disc. So the next step is, I think I need to make up the pin that goes in here, and then once I get that done, I'll be able to actually put it in a hole and work out where I am horizontal, and also work out where I need to be, you know, in and out here this way. And once that's done, I'll be able to clamp it up over here on the left, and I can drill some holes through and mount the bracket in the right place. Now you might have noticed I've drilled this, or cut the slot lower down, and the idea for that was this piece of metal is probably a bit too wide. So what I was going to do was about this distance here, I'm going to probably cut a line through here and just sort of bend it up here at the end, and then that'll make it a little bit more sort of less bulky, I guess, and better, you know, view at working out or seeing where, you know, the pins going into the hole. So just maybe a little bit of aesthetics as well. So that's the plan for that, and we'll go ahead and make this pin now, and then mount it onto the bracket here, and we're pretty much done. Well, we've pretty much got the project finished here, so I'll just run you through a couple of things. You might have seen earlier on in the video I had a point on here, and when that was engaging into the holes there was still a little bit of movement just sitting on the taper. So what I've done here is I've got a point, but I've got a narrower part here. It's about 3.5 millimeters, and that fits into the hole nice and snug. So now there's kind of no movement on there, or it's not sitting on a taper type of thing. I needed to get this bracket a little bit closer to the plate as well. I was limited on how far I could push this up in the machine. I'll show you that in a minute once we mount it up. So I took another 5 mil off this aluminium block here. So it's pretty much flush here now, these two plates, and that brings me in a little bit more. And I have put it on the machine and tried it out, and it works pretty good. Now there is one flaw, and it's not to do with these parts that I've made just now, but it's to do with the way this mechanism works to hold the disc and the mandrel in the bore of the lathe. So it just sits on a taper there, and of course when you tighten it up it pulls, and this piece comes this way and it pushes this piece the other way, and that's what locks it into the bore of the lathe. When you spin it, these holes, like if we lined up the blue area and we lined up the pin into the blue hole there, once we get round half a turn, it is fractionally off and the pin doesn't really want to go in the hole. And I think it's because of this mechanism here. So I'm going to change that. I'm not going to change it in this video because this is certainly long enough as it is. But I'll change this in another video when I do the next step on this, which is I need 100 holes around here. So that's going to be probably in another video how I machine the holes in here. So that's what I need for the next job that I'm going to do, which is the boring head. And on the boring head there is a little dial where you can move the head or the tool out a little bit further each time, and that dial has divisions on it, and I'm not going to put 100 divisions on it, but I need 100 holes so I can maybe go in 5s or something like that. And that's the reason why I actually started to work on this project again. So anyway, let me get this on the lathe and we'll show you how it works. Okay, so here we are all mounted on the machine. We've got the indexing plate in here and our bracket on here. So just before we get into looking at the mechanism, the angle bracket, or the existing angle bracket on the lathe here, there was a little bit of flex when I was pulling the knob out because it was bolted to this angle bracket here. So I had to put these little gussets in here. We've got one there and one down the bottom here, and that's made it a lot more stronger. Not my best welding in there, and I had to do it on the machine because I couldn't really get in the back there to get at removing the bolts for the bracket. So anyway, it's nice and solid. The plunger is all spring loaded, so there's a bit of tension on there, and yeah, so you just pull it out and just turn it around to your next index and it'll line up, and just continue to do that as you go through. And of course you can loosen this off and slide this into one of the other rings of holes if we need to do that. Now that issue that I was talking about before, when you get sort of halfway round, it's very close, but it just doesn't line up. It's quite rigid here, which is good. You don't want any flexibility and have your markings or holes going crooked, but it's just a fraction off because it's not completely running, you know, round or concentric. So I'll have to, you know, make some modifications to the mandrel to make it sort of clamp in the bore more in a central position. So that's going to be in the next video that I do on this dividing head or plate. As you can see here, I've hot blued all the steel parts, so that sort of prevents it from rusting and gives it that nice black kind of look as well. And lastly, I bolted it on with these big bolts here. I wanted to leave all this bracket assembly on here because it's harder to get to and tighten up and take off. So I've just made it so we can loosen off these larger bolts here and then just take that whole bracket assembly, that front piece here, right off, including the plunger. So that's how that's been designed, and I think that'll work pretty good and be easy to, you know, put on and take off in the future. So once again, thanks for watching.